Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Previtt. I am the lead faculty for clinical management of the fitness, athlete, pregnancy, and postpartum. We are an 8-week online course that I teach with internal pelvic floor physical therapist Kelsey Valentine, who's my assistant faculty, about all things fitness athlete for the pregnant and postpartum athlete. If you guys were with us this past weekend, the sampler wasn't exactly what we wanted, but we were able to do a virtual sampler, and honestly, the engagement was just incredible. We were able to do like a social hour at the end. It was just awesome to be able to connect with everyone from different areas of the globe and stay safe with everything that's going on in our respective areas and still get a really good weekend. So I still feel really jazzed and energized from that weekend. We always do when we have a course like that. And so I'm really, really pumped. Hey Jeff, how are you? If you guys are interested in learning more about working with a fitness athlete, CrossFit weightlifter, runner, powerlifter who is in this period of her life where she is in her pregnant and postpartum journey, we have our next 8-week online course starting September 14th. So we already have quite a few signups, so I'm really, really excited about that. We are ready to go in September. And so today I thought that we would talk a little bit about breath manipulation in the Olympic lifts. Oftentimes we think when we're doing Olympic weightlifting, which is the clean and jerk and the snatch, that we are going to be doing a Valselva the entire time. And while that is one way for us to complete the lift, that may not be the best way for every person. And so we're going to talk about that. And so the first thing we have to talk about is, why is this important? And the reason why is because when we modulate our breath, we modulate the amount of pressure in our core canister. So thinking that our core is essentially a box, we all know this, with our diaphragm, pelvic floor, transverse abdominis, anterior core wall, and some of our multifidi, spinal erectors, et cetera, that help to keep the spine in a neutral position for both the clean and jerk and the snatch in order to transfer more force from the floor into the barbell and subsequently increase our performance. When we are in, so question about hernias, absolutely. So hernias with Valselva sometimes, and the amount of weight lifted off the ground, you're gonna have to do a much gradual progression. I usually go with this, if it's a surgical hernia, then I obviously go with the recommendations of the surgeon. If not, I go with symptoms or palpation. The other thing for individuals who have a hernia is we often think about things like diastasis recti, which is that separation of the linea alba, the lack of tensile strength in the linea alba that occurs. That also is really prevalent in an individual with a hernia. So I would definitely be assessing for diastasis recti, and oftentimes that doming or coning is a lack of pressure management or a lack of integrity across the anterior core wall, which is essentially a leaking of pressure, and it's coming out in that doming, coning, or essentially can sometimes occur as a hernia. And therefore we're definitely going to be having to use some of our core strategies and transfer those core strategies into our Olympic lifts in order for athletes to get back into those movements. That is such a good question. So that leads me to what happens when our pressure goes up. So when we are thinking about that core canister, we need to be able to manage the amount of pressure that we are generating so that we can use it for performance. And if our pressure exceeds our capacity, we see different things occur in the lift. So what that can be is a loss of spinal position. So that's when we start getting into those dog pooping looking types of lifts where we catch that front rack and we lose our thoracic, where our elbows drop, where we lose a weight forward or back because of our lack of position. It can be that we start to see, not necessarily as much in the Olympic lifts, but kind of an extension of that hernia conversation. We can see doming or coning that happens for individuals who are presenting with diastasis recti or a hernia. In a lot of women, what that can also translate into is that the pressure, instead of leaking out the back or out the front, it leaks out the bottom, and we experience some symptoms of incontinence where you lose your continence and you see a small to large amount of urine leakage or flatulence in the bottom position of a squat. And so oftentimes we think about this only for the female athlete, but hey, I have been in strength and conditioning enough times where I know that there are some gentlemen who are also dealing with it because they're having issues with flatulence in the bottom of a heavy squat, and that is a leaking of pressure that is presenting in a different way for a male athlete. So this is not only for the female athlete, this is for the male athlete as well. And so if we have an issue with pressure management, which is what tends to be what happens with an issue with incontinence, issue with flatulence, issue with doming, coning, or loss of position, we need to try and think about ways for us to modulate that pressure. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with breath work. And so when we are thinking about returning postpartum, oftentimes early postpartum recovery focuses very much on breathing through the entirety of the lift. So oftentimes athletes are cued to breathe out during the concentric or the hardest phase of the movement. So for a deadlift or for a clean, that would be the pull off the ground. Snatch, that would be the pull off the ground. And for the squat, it would be in the bottom of the hole. Where this starts to get a little bit more challenging with the Olympic lifts is that we essentially have a deadlift and a squat. So we have two concentric phases in the clean. And so trying to get your athlete to breathe out and then on the pull off the floor, breathe in the second pull, and then breathe out again as they transition from the third pull to the stand is really challenging to be able to teach them. So what is things that we can do? And we're going to go through a couple of examples. So the first thing that I'll get my athletes who are very early postpartum to do is breathe out through the entirety of the lift, especially on the clean. So what that'll mean is on the clean, you're going to take in air, and then as you pull off the floor, you're going to breathe out the entire way into the catch, breathe out through the stand, and then intake your breath so that you can breathe out again on the jerk. For the snatch, depending on how comfy you feel in the bottom, some athletes can actually breathe out on the snatch. As they catch in the overhead squat, they can breathe in, breathe out, or pause there because the weight is generally not at a functional level that the strength is usually the issue. It's usually a motor control power speed component that's going to create the failure of a lift in the snatch. So if you can stay comfy there, you can modulate your breath, or same thing, you can be breathing out through the entirety of the lift, including as you stand up, and then you just let your air in again when you are finishing up the snatch. This is obviously going to change a bit for barbell cycling, where you're really going to have to be conscientious of it, but a lot of these rules still apply. When we have a barbell in a Metcon, our heart rate can go up really quickly if we are constantly trying to Valselva, and so really being conscientious about breath mechanics during a workout can actually really improve performance. So that is one way. If you are getting an athlete to transition into Valselva, another thing that can be extremely helpful is being very intentional around when you let your breath out. So I'm going to explain all these, and then I'm going to go over like just with an empty bar and go through an example. So what you tend to see is when you're looking at high level athletes and they are performing a clean, they are often working at anywhere between 70 and 90% of their front squat. So this is legitimate weight it's legitimate weight anyway, but in terms of relative strength required to complete a clean at a heavy weight, they are working at a high level of exertion. And so oftentimes they're going to be doing a Valselva. We know that above 80% of your 1 rep max, you are automatically going to close the glottis, which is one of the prerequisite steps for performing a Valselva, and then you are going to lift that weight. So most athletes are going to brace, bring their abdomen in, increase that spinal stiffness. You're going to have a transient increase in your blood pressure that is absolutely safe, and they're going to come in to the clean. What can happen is that as they are standing the bar up, they hit a sticking point. And so what do you see a lot of athletes do? They grunt, or they forcefully exhale in that point of exertion to try and get through it. What is happening there? What is happening is they are instantaneously and without realizing it, modulating their pressure to improve their performance. So their pressure is exceeding, like the more you are straining under that load, the more and more your pressure is starting to increase. And so by exhaling, they're bringing that pressure down, they're allowing that spinal stiffness to continue, and sometimes it allows them to get through the lift. And so what that can actually do is confer a performance advantage for athletes in order for us to be able to successfully complete a lift at a high percentage of our 1 rep max. And I think that this is really interesting because oftentimes when we're thinking about breath manipulation, we really are just focusing it on the postpartum athlete or the pregnant athlete. And I think that if we take these concepts and constructs, we can actually really transfer it into a lot of different athletic populations. And we can actually work on improving performance for any person who is interested in improving in their metabolic conditioning workouts. Because when I was competing as a competitive CrossFitter, one of the biggest things that I always focused on throughout my entire Metcon was my breath from the very beginning so that I never hit that red line. So can we take the concepts that we know with the pelvic floor and with breath manipulation and transfer it into general population? Abso-freaking-lutely, we can. And so this is a really important construct. The last thing that I'm going to say about breath manipulation before I pick up a bar is that what we know about the pelvic floor is that the pelvic floor is anticipatory. When we have an exhale, we actually cue the pelvic floor to contract, which for many athletes is extremely important for maintaining their continence, especially if they are having issues with stress urinary incontinence. And that might mean that exhaling as the bar is being lifted may be too late. So some athletes, you can play with the mechanics, might actually need to start their exhale just slightly before initiation of the lift. And playing around with that can really help to potentially improve symptoms. And so trying to think about that. So I'm going to grab a bar and go through all of those examples so you guys can kind of see it in real time. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a bit of a wrist injury, so if you see my left wrist getting a little bit funky, that is why. But, so first thing that we went over was breathing through the entirety of the lift. So what that is going to look like, I have an athlete in their starting position. I'm going to breathe out. And then I'm going to breathe in and breathe out. I think I almost lost my live feed on Instagram here. No, there we go. We're reconnecting here. There we go. We're reconnecting. Sorry about that, guys. So breathing through the entirety of the lift. I'm going to go through that one more time just for my Instagram peeps. Coming in, breathing out, breathe in. For the snatch, same thing. You're going to come into the floor. You're going to breathe out. And get all the way down into the bottom position. My phone wants to keep pausing. Okay, so then for the athlete who has progressed away from exhaling on exertion and feels okay with starting to Valselva, where is that sticking point? So that sticking point may be as they're coming up from the clean. So you're getting into the bottom position and you get here and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm stuck. You breathe out. And sometimes you can help with the lift. You can readjust, grab some air, and use that in order to get into the bottom position of, or get out of the bottom position of the clean and allow you to rock up into the jerk. So there is a couple of examples of how we can start to manipulate breath. Things to consider is that our core is a pressure management system. Having increased pressure increases spinal stability, and that is going to infer a performance advantage. So this is not just something that is relevant to the pregnant and postpartum athlete, not just relevant for the female athlete who is experiencing stress urinary incontinence. Exhaling during exertion is an important way to modulate performance in the metabolic conditioning piece. It is also a way to manage pressure for female athletes who are having issues with pressure management. And we know that leaking of pressure can happen in a variety of ways. Loss of spinal stability, doming or coning if we're not less for the Olympic lifts, but some of our other CrossFit movements, or a feeling of bulging, heaviness, or leaking in the bottom of the squat, the clean, or the deadlift. So I hope you guys found that helpful. Just try and think about different areas where you can start to coach on breath in order for you to help your athletes get through different plateaus, sticking points, pain points, and just know that your athlete with back pain, your athlete who is experiencing a hernia, as we had that conversation at the very beginning, can all be extremely helpful and a way for us to help with symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction without having to rely on just Kegels. So different tools for our toolbox. All right, I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday. If you guys are interested in our 8-week online course, we start September 14th. I had a lot of questions about it, so that is so fantastic. I hope to see you all. And we will see you on the podcast next time. Bye, everyone.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.